Burning questions.
Insightful answers.
Listener's choice.
With Clement Manyathela.
So, on our listener's choice feature today, we're discussing the bracket creep. It's essentially increased tax liability that results from a rise in income. One of our listeners asked that we bring in an expert who can explain how some taxpayers will be affected by this following the finance minister's tabling of the budget. Remember, when he tabled the budget, he announced or recommended that the tax brackets will not be adjusted for inflation, which is worrying because without inflation adjustments to tax brackets, many South Africans will be paying more income tax despite no real increase in their spending power. And that's why some economists often call this taxation through inflation. So if you've received a salary increase or you're due for an increase this year, your take home could become less due to the proposal by Treasury not to adjust personal income tax for inflation, which is what Action SA, by the way, has as part of its recommendations to the finance minister. So that's what we're talking about this morning. So if you've got any questions about this, you can call us on 011-883-0702. If you want to send a WhatsApp voice note, that number is 072-702-1702. I've heard that some people have already picked up these effects of this non-adjusted personal income tax. And the problem here is that while you get less, the state is generating more. So how does it all work? We've got Avi Kay, who is the CEO of Isihlangu Financial Services, joining us via Zoom. Avi, thank you for making time for us. Good morning.
Clement, it's great to be with you. Thank you.
So let's maybe start, because I gave my basic understanding there of this budget creep. Can you just explain what it is and why we should be concerned about it following the finance minister's tabling of the budget?
So your introduction was absolutely spot on. And to summarize it, what happens is that we earn a salary. The employer is obligated to deduct PAYE off the salary that we get. The employer pays it over to SARS, and we come out with what we call our net salary. And we get used to that. And this is what we earn. The money comes into our account. Usually tax is taken off, and then they can add things like medical aid or a pension or a provident fund or your personal contributions to retirement annuity. Those things can also come off, but we get used to the net salary. Then what happens is that Clement gets called into the office and says, Clement, you're doing a brilliant job. We are going to give you a pay rise. And you're so excited because it goes up by a couple of R1,000. And in your mind, you're already thinking, how can I pay off this debt? How can I settle this? How can I maybe upgrade my quality of life, my standard of living, whatever it is? And all of a sudden the salary bill comes through, and you look at your salary slip, you tear off those perforated edges and you look at it and you know that the money is going to be in your account tonight. And you say, but where's the money gone? I was meant to get R5,000 more, but I'm only getting, in the examples I worked out, around about R3,700 more. Because often what happens is that you go from one tax bracket into a higher tax bracket, and that difference gets taxed at a higher rate. So you end up paying more tax on the extra that you've received. It could be that you stay within the same tax bracket, but often it pushes you into a next tax bracket, which means you do technically come home with more, but it's less than one often expected. And this is something that when I see it or when it's discussed with me, honestly makes me a little bit frustrated because ultimately this is something that should be discussed between employer and employee, especially if the employer knows that the employee is a bright individual doing their best, but tax numbers, this type of stuff's not what they do on a daily basis. And you're giving them an increase, the average person would think, oh, that extra is coming into my pocket.
Yeah.
I really believe it's incumbent upon employers to sit down and say, Clement, this is what your increase is going to be. Here's what we call a dummy pay slip. It means that because of the increase, this is the tax you're now going to pay. You might pay more on your pension fund, etc., etc., and therefore you'll only come home with this. At least you know what it is. There's another scenario which is even more comfortable, where a lot of employers these days, especially in smaller companies where you've got really bespoke people you want to keep them happy, and you want to avoid any misunderstandings. You say, I'm going to give you an increase. The increase for you in your pocket will be X. The effect for us as a company will be Y, because we now have to pay more PAYE. So your gross salary has gone up, but we're showing you upfront what we are, by our increase, what you're going to get. And like that, you just avoid a whole lot of issues. And it's really pretty straightforward when you sit down and do it. And my plea to both employers and employees is, please just be clear with us, be upfront, because there's nothing worse than a person coming to work the next day totally disheartened because they expected Y and the reality was not that.
Yeah.
That can be cleared up front, but just sitting down with HR, doing a dummy pay slip and say, because we value you, this is what we're increasing your salary to, and you can tell your family, this is what you bring.
Yeah,
home.
well, some employers will not want to do that, because if really I'm going to end up paying more tax, but I'm taking home less, I'm going to ask them, okay, what's the point of this increase if I'm really not going to see the benefit of it? What do you say to people who have received a salary increase, or they're due for a salary increase this year? Are you advising them that go talk to your employers about it, do that dummy sleep, because you may have this idea that, you've made your own calculations, but in fact, based on what the finance minister has proposed in that budget, which seems to be what will come into effect, you may want to go check with your employers what this means.
100%. And Clement, it's, whether the minister does or doesn't change the tax brackets, it does have an effect, but the principle remains the same. I remember the first time as a young financial planner in Sage Life, which was many years ago, we had a wonderful receptionist lady, and we all, just asked that, can she get an increase? Really just adds value to our businesses. And she got this beautiful increase. The next day I walked in and I looked at her and I said, so what is it like when it hit your bank account? She says, I barely even noticed it. And even though I've done the academia behind it, I've never actually really seen it in real life. And when I saw her face, I almost said to myself, I'm always going to make sure that when I employ people, I always negotiate this upfront. But there's also a maturity that needs to come into the discussion. These are facts of life. People pay tax, and bracket creep is a reality. So if you can sit down, number one, and discuss it, so all the cards are on the table. Number two, there are ways to limit it without doing things that are going to get the men in blue coming after you. So one can look at retirement funds. If you have your own retirement fund or a company retirement fund, you can look at maybe increasing that a little bit. That'll give you a bigger tax deduction, so that could help. You might not be on a medical aid scheme. That could also help on it. There's also tax-free savings accounts that one could use in order to help limit the impact of that bracket creep. And then you could also sit down with your company, especially if it's a smaller company, because in a bigger company, things are already set and an individual doesn't really have the leverage to negotiate. But in a smaller company, you could look at using travel allowance. You could look at vehicle or company vehicle reimbursements. There's fringe benefit taxes. Again, I'm not a chartered accountant. I'm not a tax specialist. I'm a certified financial planner. And we look at this. But again, I would really recommend that you just look at all these options. And once you unpack them, like anything else in life, it might be overwhelming in the beginning, But if someone has the ability to explain to you how they work, and you do a little bit of homework on it by yourself, you'll find that things will become clearer. You'll look at different avenues. But Clement, the bottom line is, as that cliched saying goes, the only two certainties in life are death and taxes. And taxes are something that we need to pay. And they are done in brackets. And as you go up, you will pay more tax. So one needs to be aware of that. And once you understand that is the reality, then you can start looking at structures, how to mitigate the effect on your net take home at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's 18 minutes now after 11 o'clock. I want to take some calls and some WhatsApps. If you've got some questions for Avi Kay, who is talking to us about the budget creep, and how it works, how it affects you. Maybe you have had a situation like that where you received a salary increase, but then your take home became less due to the personal income tax not being adjusted for inflation. You can share your experience with us on 011-883-0702 or send a WhatsApp voice note. I've got a few questions here, Avi. I'll start with the one about Tsepo says, Clement, please can you ask Avi there, this budget creep, does it impact more low income, middle income, or high income earners, or everybody across the board?
And it's relative. So it affects everybody in every bracket. So as you go up in brackets, so the tax amount is larger and it will affect you in every single bracket. Ultimately, the smaller the increase, because the first jump is from 18 to 26%. So that's quite a big jump. And then it goes all the way up to, the low 40s. So it will affect everybody in every bracket. But what you'll find is as the earning capacity is larger, so the amounts that can be deducted tend to be able to be offset. If you take a retirement annuity across the board, which is something that was introduced not so long ago, it's 27.5% of your gross income across pension, provident, and retirement annuity. So it really gives a bit of wiggle room to move there. Medical aid, unfortunately, not much of a discount, so to speak, on tax. It's worked out on a formula, and it's the same for everybody. So whether you're a middle or a higher income earner doesn't really make a difference. We all get the same rebate. So the bottom line is that it affects everybody similarly on the different brackets.
And then does it matter how much your salary increase is? So in other words, those that mostly get affected by this, is it people who get that small salary increase or people who get a bigger salary increase, or that doesn't matter as long as you get pushed into a bracket, whether through a few numbers or bigger numbers?
Clement, that's exactly the word you used, pushed. Because as you were talking, I was trying to think how to explain it. If you're standing on the edge of a cliff and you've got 10 meters before the edge of the cliff and you get an increase of 7 meters, you still haven't fallen off the cliff. But if you get an increase of 11 meters, your first 10 are safe. It's your 11th meter that's going to get taxed at the greater tax amount because it goes into the next bracket. And that's why it's called bracket creep, because it creeps you into the next bracket. So yes, you can work within one bracket. And again, if you take higher income earners right at the top, the 1 to 3 percentile of earners in South Africa, there you can go from, let's take a figure, from 2 million to 5 million. It doesn't really make a difference. You're going to pay the same tax rate because you're above that threshold. So it's really just getting you over each hump as and when they arrive.
Another question is around if the employer does sit you down and says, okay, this is a salary increase we're giving you, and this is a dummy pay slip, and you see on that pay slip that you're going to be affected by this because you're going to be paying more tax, but you're taking less home. So someone is asking then, what's advisable in that case? Do you just take that salary increase? Or is it advisable to just say no, thanks?
I think saying no thanks to an increase is a silly thing, because then you might not get it next time. I mean, just being facetious, though. Definitely always take your increase. But think about it. Maybe say to the employer, how can we structure this in such a way? Is there a way I can get a quarterly bonus? Is there a way I can use it as a fringe benefit? In other words, instead of giving it to me in cash, can I get a petrol allowance? Can I get a service for my car? There's different ways of looking at it where you're not taking your wallet out, so to speak, and paying more tax. So yes, I would definitely look at it. And I'm not really appealing so much here to the employees. I'm more talking to the employer. There is nothing worse than a disgruntled employee, and there is nothing more pleasant than a satisfied, happy employee. And this is a simple way of saying, I really care about you and your family. And I want to sit down and I want to work out what is the best way for you. Now, Clement, we just need to take another thing into consideration here. Forget the bracket creep, for example. If you speak to any South African, they will tell you that the cost of living goes up on an ongoing basis. Their 100 Rand when they walk into a store is worth less on an ongoing basis. So let's take in a scenario where you've got a person working for you. This lady earns 25,000 Rand, and you now give her a 10% increase of 2,500 Rand. And let's ignore tax for the moment. But now her little blessing, her little child is now going to first year school. And school costs 3,000 Rand. So what's happened in this lady's life in reality is she's gone backwards by 500 Rand because her monthly expenses have gone up by 500 more than the increase. Plus, she's got the inflation. She's got things costing more at the store. And if employees would just stand back and say, wow, not only has she not got an increase in real terms because of her life circumstances, but she's gone backwards and the cost of living has gone up. That doesn't mean that employers need to give 20, 30% increases. I'm not advocating that. I'm advocating that one needs to understand those who help your business grow, those who grease the wheels of your livelihood, and understand their needs and maybe sit down and work out a way that is best for them, because there is nothing worse than looking at someone in the eyes, knowing that they are eating a piece of bread with peanut butter on it instead of whatever else people are eating, simply because they can't come out. How do you expect them to be productive? And I know it's also esoteric for some people, but the bottom line is that this is not dark magic. It's not a secret science. It's reality. And if we sit down and we work it out together, we'll find that there is a way within the confines of the reality that tax is here to stay.
All right, let's go to some WhatsApps.
Clement and your speaker. So he says there's two things that are certain in life, and that is debt and tax. Not everywhere. Arab countries don't pay tax. And I just want to ask him, what's his view, or how does it work in countries that don't pay tax, but you still get your full salary? What are they doing differently to countries that are just taxing to survive? There's countries like Saudi Arabia or Arab countries, they don't charge tax. So how do they do it? And why do we, the non-Arab countries, have to suffer with such high taxes? How do they do it? Just please ask him.
Good morning, Clement. You're speaking to Source of Ear from Saralton. I work for an organization that's split into two. There's support structure and then there's operational structure. So the salary negotiations are run parallel. What I want to ask from Mr. K is, after the salary agreements for both support and operations bargaining units have concluded, does he mean when he says that the employer has an obligation to inform the employees of the changes? And I want to also acknowledge that the monetary deductions will at some point tolerate regardless of which bargaining unit you are from. So does that mean that either in the form of an employer representative or the union representatives, that they need to run sessions where they now tell us about the changes that will come with the agreements in terms of what we will be taking home after the tax? Because I suppose the tax will also increase based on the agreements. Thanks, Clem.
Great questions. Thank you, guys. Yeah. Avi?
Great. So, Clement, let's answer the first question first. So I didn't get the lady's name. An absolutely phenomenal question. But we need to take a step back and look at it. The Arab countries, the Emirates, Saudi, all those places are they are not the norm. They are the exception to the norm. Most first world countries, or every first world country in the world, except for those type of countries and certain small places where there are tax havens, so to speak, pay tax. In order for a country to operate, to do simple things like, or seemingly simple things, electricity, water, security, infrastructure, airports, all that comes from taxpayers' money. The government itself is not a business, doesn't generate income. It manages the income that it receives from its citizens, and it pays for those services that it is obligated to provide to the citizens. So that's the way it works in the norm. If you take those countries that we were speaking about, Saudi and live in a place like Dubai, there they almost started from an individual family, from a monarchy, from an individual group of people who wanted to build their economies separate from being reliant on oil only. And first of all, it just shows that when you put your mind to something, what you can do. And the way to attract people to come and to create businesses in their countries was by saying that we're not going to tax you. You can come here and you can benefit from it. The taxes, therefore, are more indirect through the services and utilities that you use. I wish I could say that South Africa doesn't need to tax, but we are like every other country in Europe, the UK, America, South America, Australia. Taxes are the engine room of what gives the energy to a country to run. What's important, though, is that it's managed correctly. And, a simple thing, if you just work out, if every manager if every minister in the government swapped their cars for Toyota Corollas, and we took that money and we put it directly into education, how many hundreds of thousands, if not millions, we would have to spend on education. So it's those things that are more important than whether we are taxed or not taxed, because we're going to be taxed, how it's used. And then Soso's question really knocks on the head exactly what I was saying before. Here you've got massive structures with a massive company, so to rather. You've got two structures. You could have multiple structures. If you look in mining, you've got different structures. You've got management. You've got those who are professional. You've got those who are doing manual work. And each one has a different negotiation as to what the salary should be. And we're all well aware of how much disturbance that's caused in the job market. The most important thing and the responsibility of the unions, all the representatives that are going to negotiate, is that they get a clear mandate from their representatives as to what they're looking for. And together with that is the responsibility to monitor and to taper the expectations. If you want us to go and to negotiate for you for a 35% increase, we're wasting our time. Let's rather go in and see what is the norm. What is in the market? What happens around the world? And let us get a proper mandate from you that is something we can really get our teeth into with the employer. And then we need to come back and explain. The expression I often use is that when you're going to speak to blue collar workers, guys who've worked the whole day in a factory and they just want to understand what's going on. Don't walk in your Armani suit and your polished black shoes and your briefcase and stand on a pedestal and talk down to them.
Yeah.
Because before you...
Oh, we've lost there. But Aki, I think, Avi, I think we got the point there. Thank you so much for your time. Avi Kay, CEO of Isihlangu Financial Services.